Hello, everyone, friends, colleagues, acquaintances, and Prime Minister handsome Bernie Sanders. Welcome to the 12th ever episode of the Communal Conversation. I'm Yosef Zeldman here with my very special guest, Melissa Lantsman. More on Melissa in a minute. First, we must mention our sponsors as usual on this show. This week's episode of the Communal Conversation is brought to you by our amazing sponsors over at EV Direct. EV Direct is the home of the Evolute, a smart multi-user electric vehicle charging system for condominiums. Go electric or go dig for oil. This week's episode also sponsored by Custom by Shara. More on that in mid-break. Melissa, can I call you Melissa?
Absolutely.
Okay, welcome to the show. Welcome to the Communal Conversation.
Thank you for having me.
Of course, I'm so happy to have you here. At this point, why don't you tell the people who you are, where you've been, what you're doing?
Absolutely. So, first off, I'm really excited to be joining this podcast, and secondly, I'll tell you a little bit about who I am. I'm Melissa Lantsman, and I'm the Conservative nominated candidate here in Thornhill for the next election, whenever that next election will be. So right. We're living in limbo, but I'm really excited to do things like this to get to know parts of the community that I didn't grow up in or I don't know very well, and to make sure that this riding, our little neck of the woods in Thornhill, has a strong Conservative voice, as it has had for more than a decade now. So that's what I'm doing. A little bit about me. I grew up here in Thornhill. I've lived here for most of my life. I have a history in PR and politics, and I'm lucky enough to have been there in the rise of Stephen Harper. I got to work with him in that government for about 10 years, and now I run a public affairs practice in one of the PR firms in Toronto. So I've always got to be in politics or on the periphery of politics, and I think that's given me a good leg up in understanding what goes on in that weird place in Ottawa that doesn't make a whole lot of sense to a whole lot of people.
Yeah, right. It's always the behind closed doors. What are they actually thinking?
Yeah, how do they make this silly decision that everybody hates?
Why? Yeah, exactly. Why are we putting everything in the hands of these people who constantly are just saying things that we don't agree with?
Absolutely. So I think it's important to get to know the people that that are charged with making those decisions, and to make sure that those decisions reflect sort of the best data and the reality on the ground, because I think there's often a bit of a disconnect
between reality and rhetoric, right?
Absolutely. Well, reality and rhetoric, and people making decisions at boardroom tables or in the fancy hallways of Ottawa that are really not good for people.
Right. Okay. Awesome. That's definitely a strong platform. So we spoke briefly a few days ago when I met you, and all of my viewers who are sick of hearing about this know that I'm a libertarian. I'm someone who is more pro smaller government, empowering local government as opposed to the big overarching powers of federal government. It doesn't matter if it's Canada, US, UK. I think smaller government's always the best way to go. And it is quite unfortunate that people constantly feel in politics that they're voting for the lesser of two evils. It doesn't matter if it's like I said, Canadian American elections, but some people feel as if they don't actually have a voice representing them on a larger federal scale. They just sort of have to go with someone that they agree with the most, but it doesn't necessarily reflect their views. However, there's a difference between large government and local government.
For sure.
And local government is what you're running to represent, obviously. You're running to represent locally
in Ottawa, and make sure that some of our views, the community's views, our wider Thornhill issues are actually at the forefront of the agenda. And I think you need a strong voice who's not afraid to demand to be heard. And look, I agree with you in principle on less government, less intrusion into our lives, allowing people to do what they want to do, to make ends meet, to frankly, to have sort of less restrictions on their movement, on their ability to worship, on their ability to feed their families. That's always where I think conservatives come to
free enterprise.
Right? Absolutely, and it's proven to frankly work. And I think I will say this: we've been in a pandemic for for quite some time. And I'm not going to belabor the COVID point. I think we've talked enough about.
I think everyone's heard enough.
Yeah,
we
were COVIDed out. But what it has done is it's allowed, it's starved institutions. It's starved our shuls. It's starved our churches, our charities that play a big role in people's lives.
Right.
And it's allowed government to move in and fill that void. And that's a really, really dangerous place to be. Because government isn't particularly good at, the things that you would go to shul to get, or the things that you would go to church to get, or the things that you would get from your local charity advocating for your patient rights.
It's not the government's function,
exactly.
But a lot of people seem to think it is.
Well, we when we come dependent on something because, our restrictions, the lack of economic activity have starved these organizations. Well, they have no choice. They can't, they frankly can't function in the way that they did. And we've really got to get back to it,
right.
And have people do the things that they are good at.
I completely agree with you. And I do want to make that clear to the viewers that this is not going to be a COVID cast.
No.
Quite sick of that.
Absolutely.
I made a speech recently for my father's yard site, broadcasting to my friends and family, and I specifically avoided saying the word COVID. I replaced it with I said, I'm not even going to say the word. Everyone knows what it is. We all know what we're dealing with. But yeah, so on a broader point about government, you're absolutely right. I think, I don't know. So someone like you who's running to represent a specific community, I think is extremely important. I think looking for empathy and reflective beliefs from someone like you, for someone voting for you, makes a lot of sense. I think something that people are often mischaracterizing is empathy in a general sense in politics, that, the prime minister up right. there or people in the cabinet are supposed to know exactly how you feel. They know what you want and how you are, and that they know your wants and needs, when really that's not true. It's the same with the president of the United States. So this is, you can disagree with me on this, which is totally fine. I think that when people look for so much empathy in politics and not in their community or friends or family or, a dog,
right.
I think people often confuse what those leadership roles are actually supposed to be. Do you think I'm on that?
Yeah, look, I think I agree with you, and I think that you should always get what you need to get from your community, your family, your dog, whatever it is. And but what you would expect from your politicians is to make the best decision with the most moral clarity on being on what's right and what's wrong and what side of history we're going to end up. And it's frankly, it's I was reading the paper today and I'm looking at yet another government apology, and I am not sure that these collective apologies necessarily make our world a better place. I think we want to see governments act on wrongs of the past, but there's a lot of platitudes, and I think that having somebody there that will bring forward the needs and the ideas of the community is the best that you're going to get. And I will give you this, the way to make sort of that big government seem more local, and I don't think we do this enough. And when there's a tough decision and the community is divided on it, I don't think it's a bad thing to use the referendum model. And we have the ability to do that as politicians, to ask the community where they stand, and you would vote the conscience of the community.
You want to contextualize that a little more for the
viewers?
Yeah.
So let's say there's a really really important piece of legislation in front of the House of Commons, and I know how I feel about it. I generally know which side I fall on, and if that happens to be offside with the majority of my constituents, I would want to get an understanding from everybody that you represent on where they stand. And I think the vocal, proponents or opponents of such said piece of legislation would make it known, and you represent them. And I think that's important. It's important to vote. That's not that I'm going to say that I'm not going to push forward my view and make it known, but I do think that there is the ability for people to get more involved in politics, more involved in the big decisions that this country has to make, because there's a lot at stake for the future. And that's what I've been talking about, certainly in my campaigning, is we've got to think not 4 months or 4 weeks or 4 years down the road. We got to think about what this country is in 40 years. And nobody talks about that.
Yeah, that's a very, very good point. I must confess to you, actually, that my plan, I hope to God this changes. My plan is not to stay in Canada long term. I do plan on leaving this country back to the United States in a couple of years, because what you see as a hope for the future, I don't see, unfortunately, right?
Well,
I'm not that you don't make me hopeful for the future, but my vision of Canada compared to America's is definitely, I don't know, my plan is to move to Florida, right? Where if we sold this house here in Thornhill, we could buy 3 mansions in Florida, right?
And you raise an important point, and I wish that I wasn't upset about that, because I think when the country loses people like you, loses people that are involved in their community, having these conversations out in the open, I think this is the worst of the brain drain right here. It's happening right here in this in this conversation, and you're absolutely right. I think home ownership is a sort of a distant thing that young people today, you can't have the life that your parents gave you in Thornhill. No. It's really, really difficult. You can't buy a house in the place where you grew up, and there are lots of reasons for that, and I think many of those reasons have to do with the fact that the federal government just hasn't been charged with this issue. There's been a lot of inaction in it. We haven't built the housing, and we haven't built a place where people want to stay. We've got over-regulation.
I was going to say it carries through in currency and taxes, right? Like that's another element for wanting to.
Absolutely, and it's I've got a lot of I'm fairly young for a politician. I'm not particularly young, but I'm 37 years old, which is young for a conservative politician. And I think that generally people don't talk about the next jobs. I want my kids to have a job that doesn't even exist yet. And I want this country to be able to give that opportunity. It's fine if they're doctors and they're lawyers or they're rabbinical students. That's fine too. But I want this country to be a country where we don't even know our potential yet, because we are so far away from reaching it. And it's things like taxes, and it's things like regulations, and it's things like attracting business and building critical infrastructure, where people like you have to look at the States and no way, I'm staying in Canada. This is the place where I want to grow, I want to live, I want to play, and I want to raise my family.
Listen, that's what I hope for, right? Like that, and hopefully
let's see if we can convince you by the end of this podcast.
Right. My tickets aren't set yet, so there's plenty of time. But I don't know. I figured I'd mention it because that is something that I talk about a lot with my family and friends. That even though I love the people in Canada, I really do. This community is incredible. It's given me everything I need. I have an incredible high school I went to, my York University, I really, really like as an institution. But just in terms of, you're right, would I want to raise my kids, have my kids play and grow in a place, I don't want to say like this because that sounds vaguely ominous, but in a place where I'm not so sure if I can support myself through income or even get a proper house, whatever it might be. No, right? That's the calculation for me in my head. You
know what? We celebrate. I don't hear anybody saying Canada is the best country in the world. And I'm a kid of immigrants. I'm a kid of Russian immigrants that ran away. They were Ukrainian Jews, and the Ukrainians wouldn't call them Ukrainians. They called them Jews, and they came here for a better life. And they gave us a better life. They gave us the leg up. We were educated in the best schools, in the best institutions, and we got to do whatever we wanted. Yep. And I want that to be the case today. And I want people to say that this is the best country in the world. And we don't strive for, mediocre middle place. Because that's sort of what it feels like right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm also a descendant of immigrants. My grandfather on my dad's side escaped Warsaw at the beginning of the Holocaust, had to basically walk across 3 countries to get to a ferry to America and eventually to Canada. It's a very, very interesting story. So I do understand the sort of, I know usually it's American dream, but the Canadian dream. I do. I do understand what it's given to so many people. I just hope that that's something that can be fulfilled and honestly corrected for the future from what it is right now.
We've got to start somewhere.
Right, exactly. Right. So that's, that's what we're here for. Okay. So now that I've gotten my American patriotism out of the way for a second, which for the record is waning nowadays in the current political climate, as proud as I am to be an American, sometimes you look over the border and you're like,
For sure. Sometimes the grass is greener on the other side, but we don't know, we don't know what we have here. And I think we haven't even tapped into the beginning of our potential in this country. So I'm really excited about the future and not so angry about the last 14 months in this country. I think I see a huge window of opportunity where Canada can punch above its weight again.
That's awesome. That's making me feel more optimistic, honestly, because usually, and it's also it's a credit to the people I hang out with that are usually sort of with me, like, oh yeah, Canada sucks. This is the worst. Go to Florida. You're one of the people actually shifting away.
We're bringing you back.
giving me a lot to think about. Okay, so speaking of Canada, something I wanted to just bring up that you mentioned in terms of jobs of the future. Something that I saw on your campaign platform, which I really appreciate, is you mentioned that jobs by numbers does not actually mean meaningful job growth, right? And I think as in what you feel free to.
Yeah, look, we wait every few Fridays we get these Canada job numbers, and it's like thousands up, thousands down. And we talked about this at the beginning of this conversation, where you're a libertarian. Many of those jobs are tied to seasonal jobs or the growth of government. Those aren't the kinds of jobs that we need. We need to talk about the types of jobs that we're going to have in the future, because it's if government gets bigger, those are fully government jobs. If we actually have seasons in this country, which tend to have as of late, then those are seasonal jobs. But we've got to talk about sort of meaningful careers where entrepreneurs can grow their footprint here, that they don't have to look to Europe and they don't have to look to Australia to different markets. And our corporate tax rates are competitive with our neighbors. So people that actually want to set up shop here. That's the thing that we're not talking about. We're never talking about good jobs. We're just talking about jobs
as this buzzword everyone says.
It's the same way it's a way to quantify something without quality, and that's a dangerous place to be in politics, because there's not a whole lot of room for conversations like this. And if we're always just throwing numbers around, we don't know what they mean anymore.
That's a very good point. I don't think people often think of that, even on the conservative side. When you see jobs up, it's jobs up, great. We can campaign.
We want to see job creators. We want to see people start businesses here in the private sector, where the public sector doesn't sort of quash them because of because all of the favor that they're getting from the government. We want to see hardworking people be able to make be able to feed their families, be able to grow the economy in a way that makes sense. Sort of like we did in 2008 after the last economic recession. We're a country that went into the recession last, and we came out first. And we created a whole bunch of new infrastructure and put people to work. And it was like a blip in the radar. And I don't think that that's the case after the year that we've had. We're in for a really, really tough, next 12 months.
100%.
Right? You can't spend money you don't have on things that you don't need. If
only any politician knew that you can't just print infinite money more than God.
Well, I think we're going to find out the hard way, because I think you're seeing commodity prices, and you're seeing the pressures of inflation rise, and that's every time that happens, every dollar in your pocket is worth less than it was worth yesterday, and that's dangerous.
Right, 100%. People are even pulling out of normal currencies for cryptocurrencies because they realize that government is inflating all the real currency,
for sure.
And it becomes less valuable.
And we're paying for things like social infrastructure with debt. We've never done that before. We've paid for things. We've paid for bridges. We've paid for water filtration plants and floodplains and things that are real, that you can touch, that put people to work.
Roads and bridges.
Right. Exactly. And now we're paying for we're paying for social programs with debt, and that's a bit of a trap.
Yeah.
Not to mention that some of these promises are not going to come to fruition, and I think about things like government daycare, and I know that it's important to bring people back into the workforce and provide people with options, but I don't think that everybody wants that one size fits all solution, and no. I certainly don't think that everybody wants to spend the $8 billion that it's going to cost a year.
Wow, I didn't even know that. Yeah, no, and when the taxpayers are the ones footing the bill. And it's one thing if you have I don't know, I don't like to use these countries as an example very often, but people in Norway and Sweden who pay most of their money in taxes, right? Sometimes over half their income, tend to be very happy and satisfied with the programs the government gives, right? Now, that's not a country I would move to. I'm very happy it works for a lot of people, but personally I would rather have more capital to do what I wish with. And you can see the basement, so
for sure.
I think that's an output of people actually being satisfied in the care their government is giving them. This country is definitely very different. We do pay a lot for social programs, for healthcare, for all of these government things that don't necessarily give us what we actually need from them. And then people in general are disincentivized from paying into government programs at all, from saying, where are my tax dollars actually going, right?
Absolutely. Look, if we're going to be celebrating our differences in this country, and we should, because we are a number of different communities that bring so much to the social fabric of this country, then we can't expect a one-size-fits-all solution when you're trying to celebrate difference. So, on that note, I think, look, I think that government provides, people who need it most with that foot up. But at some point, we're going to have to mind the dollars and cents, because like you and others in your friend group that want to look to south to make their home, like we need an effective tax base to pay for all of the things that we say that we need.
Right. And one brief point on this, you mentioned quantity over quality in terms of jobs.
Yeah.
I think that's another misconception in Canada with quantity over quality. For example, with universities. Now, I think the fact that university education is way cheaper in Canada than other countries is great. And I'm very happy that people are able to go to university at higher rates. However, people always refer to us as, we're the country with the most degrees per capita in the world. And people don't necessarily realize what those degrees are in and if they actually lead to meaningful contribution, right? I don't want to knock anyone for whatever they want to pursue educationally, but something's, I don't know. I think it's a factor in the job market when you have people who are going into degrees that don't necessarily where a job market doesn't necessarily fulfill what they're going for, right? Or you have a lot of people.
Look, I think from a university, and this is far more provincial matter, but I do have thoughts about it, and I think that the university sector, I think it needs to pay a bit more attention to sort of the job market at hand. Not to say that political science or humanities degrees are not important. I think it's important to have a well-rounded society, but there's also things that the here in Ontario, the provincial government is doing in terms of getting people into the trades, upskilling, dropping some of that stigma around, you absolutely need a 4-year degree and then a 3-year grad school and then an internship or an articling or a residency. You can make a good living doing the things like bricklaying and plumbing and things that we're going to need to build that infrastructure. It's not for everybody.
Not talked about a lot.
It isn't, and it's certainly not talked about with women. And there's more and more women going into the trades and less stigma. But that's going to take a generation. And I think there's also something to be said. Look, my parents came here, and my mom went to university, but she went to university because my dad drove a cab. My dad is a skilled and very smart engineer that wasn't credentialed here back in the 70s when they came, and that's still the story of today. So we've got to think about how to have immigrants work at their full scope of practice and make sure that we're upskilling in people that didn't have the opportunity to go to school when you were supposed to quote unquote go to school, and maybe upskill in 6 or 8 or 1-year programs where it doesn't it doesn't affect their ability to make a livelihood, because for a lot of people it's not a choice. You've got to work to feed your family, and you might not always do the things that you can be doing.
Right. And there is I don't know. I feel like we should encourage that there can be a difference between necessarily. You can always do what you love, no question. Like I'm always going to be building Lego, no matter what country or what place I'm in. Hopefully this country, God willing. But I can't have Lego be my career, because that's not a career, right? It's my hobby. Psychology is my career. And I'm very careful to make psychology not my hobby, because then I'm just going to hate everything, right? But I think we can encourage among people that having creativity is good. Yep. Having hobbies is really, really good. I'm a big proponent of that. So many people during this pandemic have asked me like, oh, what do I do? My hobbies are watching Netflix and sitting there on a television, which is not a hobby. People who have hobbies related to screens and nothing outside of that.
Right.
Like I think creativity, and like you said, humanities, all this stuff, it should be very well encouraged. But at the same time, we should be pushing some measure of stability, as in like there are very good, credible paying jobs that even if they don't seem like the most glorious thing in the world, are actually very meaningful and very
and
helpful.
sometimes people don't know about sort of what the job market needs,
right.
And some of the labor market statistics are just some piece of paper that come out of of ministry in Ottawa, and sort of the society's not really reflective of that. But we need more doctors, we need more nurses,
right.
We need more people in those professions. We need to credential people who have a perfectly good education abroad to be able to help us. It's going to be a long time before you can sit here as a Canadian and say we have the best healthcare system in the world, because I'm not sure that's the case, but we can get there.
I'm really glad you brought that up because it is something I was planning on addressing. I don't want to get too deep into it because healthcare could be an hours long conversation, but I do agree. I think Canada's healthcare system could use major improvements. I personally, I'm not someone who fully believes in the sort of what's the word? Well, we don't live in a two-tier system. We live in it's an individual, not individual mandate.
We live in a single payer.
Thank you. Single payer. Okay, great.
That's where we are.
I'm not someone who fully believes in that sort of system. I actually do think private insurance is a good thing. I think if you have government healthcare and private insurance existing side by side, constantly competing for lower prices, you get better medical care for the consumers. This is the system in Australia, in Israel, in Denmark, in Norway. But the fact that, people are constantly all the time here when they want to get a CAT scan or an MRI, right. They get put on a 2-month waiting list. They just go across the border and pay and then come back, dude. Like,
yeah, this isn't a question about spending in the healthcare system, because we spend lots.
Yeah.
Even in the province of Ontario, we spend about $65 billion a year. That's more than $1 billion a week on healthcare. So it's not a question about money. It's a question about efficiency. Are we doing as much as we can be doing outside of a hospital setting? Is everybody working to the full scope of their abilities? Pharmacists can give you a flu shot, but why can't they give you a strep throat test? Things like that. Again, we're wading into provincial issues, but I think the tremendous amount of bureaucracy that we've created here in the healthcare system is the stopgap, because it's certainly not the cash. There is a ton of cash, and I think we need to figure out how to use that better. It shouldn't take 10 years and $1 billion to build one hospital.
Where does all that money go? I mean, you said $65 billion a year.
That's
correct?
Right.
That's.
You'd think we have, this might be a comment that some listeners would get their back up, but at that much money and that much care into healthcare, you'd think the population would be vaccinated by now. But it's not.
Oh, okay, yeah, well, we could go there, yeah. But okay, we must address our mid-break sponsor. This is a podcast which does things like other podcasts, trying to replicate formulas here. So in addition to EV Direct, this week's episode of the Communal Conversation is sponsored by our good friends over at Custom by Shara. Looking for a gift to give your friend, family, or significant other? Want something unique and personalized for any occasion? Custom by Shara delivers custom, complex, hand-drawn portraits of anyone and everyone at affordable costs. Check out @Custom by Shara on Instagram to place your order and tell them we sent you. Once again, check out @Custom by Shara on Instagram to order your custom portrait today. Very much to our sponsors. Okay, so let's talk a little about what it's actually like being a conservative nominated politician, because I imagine I would say in the Thornhill community, it's probably, you have a lot of people who are similar mindset to you that are happy to see you campaigning around, but then there is the other side of this. I find the word conservative in like any political setting has now become this buzzword of like, oh, conservative? You mean terrible and awful and evil and racist? It's not something I can entirely wrap my head around, to be honest. But I don't know if you've experienced any of that sort of stuff.
Look, I think that there's always going to be opponents. It's the sign of a healthy democracy. But look, the partisanship. As the world changes, and the world is changing at an incredible pace, so do politicians. And I think that there's lots of people that see themselves in the mirror and see a conservative in the mirror and feel a bit uncomfortable about saying so, and feeling a bit uncomfortable about having the conversations that they have at their dinner tables or sort of with their friends aloud, because of the fear of being canceled or being censored. we've got to get to a point where we can have, where we can really question the government. There's a lot of anger with the Liberal government in how we've lived our lives over the last little while, and that anger is very palpable right here and across the country. And I think that it's almost like the politician is going to do pretty well right now. So if you've got somebody that is willing to stand up, willing to be on the right side of history, willing to, demand to be heard and not just sort of follow the pack. I look a little bit different than a conservative politician. I sound a little bit different than a conservative politician because I am a little bit different than a conservative politician. And I'm not worried about, getting in line or fitting in because I never have.
Right.
And so that's, I think there's something attractive about a politician who is willing to just stand up and say it the way that it is and ask some real tough questions about why are we doing what we're doing and why does it make no sense?
It's a very good way to put it. No, I agree. I think the break from formula is a very good thing. You talk about, I go to New York University. I'm sometimes a little afraid of saying my own viewpoints. Personally, I'm someone who is more conservative in their views or libertarian, but I'm never forceful about my opinions. I have friends on every corner of the political spectrum, and I love that because I get to hear every side of an issue, and I think that's very important. The problem is not everyone feels that way. There are a lot of people who feel that if you don't agree with them on their representation of an issue, then you're doing something wrong, you're committing some offense,
and part of that is that these conversations, podcasts like yours, sitting down with somebody for an hour, that just doesn't exist in today's world. It's, it's 240 characters on Twitter where there's, ad hominem attacks, but nobody, nobody really talks about, what's at the core of this policy. Why are we cheerleading around it if it doesn't make sense, and why aren't we doing things in a little bit of a different way? And that speaks to everything. It speaks to how we plan our transit, to the housing prices, to our positions on issues of foreign affairs. There is no conversation anymore, and I think the more conversation there is, and the more people hear things like your podcast, the more informed they'll be. And I think that's part of it. People shun away from politics because they're all the same. All those politicians, they're not in it for me. Spend the time. Get to know the people that are running. Have a direct conversation, because I think more often than not, people are willing to do that and try to understand why we're doing what we're doing, and again, why it doesn't make sense.
100%. I actually to be perfectly optimistic. I do agree that when you sit down and talk to people, as opposed to social media has just created the worst political climate possible, because you never actually get to know a person through a screen. You just can't. That's why I even if I see something in an Instagram comment that I completely disagree with on every level, I don't even bother,
right?
Because you can't convince someone over little words on a keyboard, and nor is it everyone's position to do that, right? A lot of people feel the agency to do that. That's totally fine. I'm not one of those people. I pick my battles, right? But in the year of York University that I got, right? So I go from, honestly, to be completely frank, I went to yeshiva is a loose term, or Chaim, down south. So I went to 120 all-boys school all my life, right? I went to Eitz Chaim, also an all-boys school, relatively the same demographic, bunch of Orthodox Jews. So going from that to an extremely diverse, multicultural, tens of thousands of students of all different places, cultures, religions, creeds, was definitely a change, right? It was a change I was very welcome to, but it was a change nonetheless. And I found that being an Orthodox Jew, like I walk around with a kippah and tzitzit all around campus every day, and just talking about what you believe in a genuine sense, usually people are very receptive to that. Even if they might disagree with you on things, if you're just someone who's nice and explains things on a human level and doesn't force their opinions on someone else, that leads to the best conversations, I think. And I honestly, somewhere in me, and you can disagree with me on this, I feel like most people in society are center right, somewhere in there. I think most people agree on most things in a moral sense. It's just these, these platitudes people throw around, people can disagree on, or the specifics of things people disagree on, the semantics, right? But I think I think in general, most people are sort of on the same page and that we all want what's best for society. We just have different ways of achieving it.
I absolutely agree. I think that most people want to live in the world in their worldview that sort of is good to them. And I think the fringes are the most vocal. And what we've seen is that the fringes of either far left wing folks that you probably would see more of at a place like York University. I think I'll hold my comments back on what do I think about the student body and where things are going.
As well, yes, I will hold back many comments.
As well as sort of the fringes of the far right. I think you're right that most people are in the middle, but they fear being canceled by those fringes, and you don't want to have the very real conversations that we need to have. And I think that's clearly evident when celebrities are getting on one side of an issue without even necessarily questioning what the other side has to say. And with lots of followers and things like Instagram and Facebook, it's very easy to take your own facts, run with them, and convince a whole lot of people that you're right. And that's dangerous.
Yeah. And Twitter, I think, is probably the worst of that. I honestly think if Twitter never existed, we'd have a lot healthier of a social climate. I mean, maybe something would have taken its place. I don't know.
Yeah, Twitter's not real. That's the good thing. So you can get on Twitter I got on Twitter over the weekend, and I've made myself a promise not to sort of read the comments or get down. And I think Twitter is a sort of a send only rather than a receive, because nothing good happens on Twitter. But it really is. It's not regular, quote, like regular people. It's not your neighbors. It's not the people that you necessarily go to school with. It's a bunch of activists, journalists, politicians, all talking in an echo chamber of like a tire fire. Like, it's really garbage.
That's a really good point, actually. And I was thinking about that people look at Twitter. Oh, how are people feeling? Most people don't go and say their thoughts publicly. They think them internally. They say them to their friends and family. So getting a public opinion from Twitter, it's not really a public opinion.
No, it's a group of nameless, faceless activists where people say things on there that they would never say to another human being in real life, because I, like you, I believe that people are inherently good.
Yeah, right. Oh, trust me, I've had those discussions with multiple of my friends, thinking that if people are inherently good or not, and be training in being a psychology major, definitely a lot of questions like that. But I do agree. I do think that most people have a tendency to not be insulting and mean and derogatory. But something like social media just gives everyone the platform to do it. And absolute power corrupts absolutely, right?
For sure.
You have the absolute power to say whatever the hell you want, even if it's not fully representative. We're just going to say it.
I think most people sort of shy away from any kind of conflict when it happens sort of between two people. I think you would rather avoid. There's a lot of avoidance. I don't think there's people that just run. I mean, there's some that run right into conflict and want to start it. But for the most part, you kind of just, when you see conflict, you cross the street and you walk down the other side of the street. On Twitter or on some of these platforms, it's the exact opposite. It's people like who get up in the morning and are looking for a fight.
Yeah.
And that's just not reflective.
They're running directly into the burning building.
Totally.
Even if there's no one left to save.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's so fun. But yeah, and I've tried to talk this about, this is called the Communal Conversation. Actually, when I first made this podcast, it almost autocorrected to the Communist Conversation, which would have been a whole different medium.
I would have maybe said no to this one.
Yeah, I wouldn't blame you. I would have said no too. No, the reason this is the Communal Conversation is because I always try to stress to my viewers, who are mostly my peers, my colleagues, friends, and family, that talking to people you disagree with is actually really healthy. Really, really healthy, I think. And not disagree with in a moral sense, not someone that, wants to, like I'm not saying you go talk to serial killers who have a completely different view on life, but someone who on semantics or on politics disagrees with your worldview. You actually learn a lot from people who disagree with you, because like you said, in terms of this echo chamber effect, if I only have people that believe, if I only have friends that believe what I believe, all I'm going to hear is what I believe, and I want to be challenged on what I believe. I like being challenged. Yeah. I like knowing what else is out there, but I think that's getting a little lost, whether it's in the bowels of Twitter or even the halls of Parliament, right? This idea that at the end of the day, we're all human. Even if we disagree on certain things, we all want what's best. why do you think that's being so disconnected from politics in general?
So I think part of it is the lack of conversation. Back in the day, I've heard it, I've never experienced it, but there were working groups of cross-party collaboration on some of the big questions around Canada, and you had people sort of rowing the boat in the same direction, and it's become really partisan. And look, I'm not going to shy away. Like I think I'm part of that. We all have elections to win, but we've got I think we've got a governing party today that's raised itself on a pedestal of platitudes and has fallen at every single test. So it sounds good and it feels good, but it's not true. And with that, they cancel anybody who doesn't agree with them. And makes them fearful of sharing their view on it. I just in this past week, do you know what it was like to standing up for Israel and a democratic nation being targeted by terrorist organizations throwing indiscriminate rocket fires into civilians? Like, that was a canceled opinion.
Right.
That was the opinion of a minority, and there's more and more people that shy away from saying things like that because of the fear of either not getting elected or being silenced or being censored, and we need more people who are unafraid to have those conversations.
100%. I'm obviously familiar with you. Also a staunch supporter of Israel. I went to the car parade that happened 2 weeks ago.
Oh, there was tons of people there.
That was 2 weeks, right?
It was a couple weeks ago.
Right. I'm losing. We're all losing track of what days what.
For sure.
It was fun. It was great. I actually attached a big Israeli flag to my blue lightsaber over there and waved it around.
Nice.
It was really fun. It's true though. But also I actually do just. We don't need to get into Middle Eastern politics fully, because obviously that's something that most people are aware of, and if not necessarily relevant to this country fully, although relevant to anyone in the Jewish community. But Israel is another one of those issues that I think most people do agree on. That I think most people think that Israel is a democracy that maybe doesn't always make the right decisions, which is fine. No country always makes the right decisions, and you're allowed to criticize Israeli policy. I've done it before, right? But in general, that Israel is a country that is important and should exist and is fighting a group of terrorists that want to see it tear down, right? I think that's something most people agree with, but it's such a contentious issue that no one wants to talk about it.
Well, it's a contentious issue, and what happens is when you don't have somebody at the helm with the moral clarity to call it the way that it is that it breeds things like an allowance for people to assault Jews in the street. And when you're silent on something, it inevitably means that you condone the other thing. So if you had a government that squarely said, this is not acceptable. This is where we are. There's no moral equivalency between a democratic nation who's defending itself and a terrorist organization that seeks to destroy it. Then you would send a message to the population that doesn't belong in our streets. And I think we didn't get that, and we haven't gotten that from politicians. And as a result, I think you've seen a rise in anti-Semitism over the last 2 weeks at a pace that I've never seen before and I've never felt before. I think our friends in Europe have felt that. But that never came here, and I think people are afraid, and they need to see that from their government. They need to see the statements, because the statements inevitably say to the other side, "You can't do this here. It's not welcome." I
agree, and I was surprised that over the weekend, President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris actually did come out and say there is no moral equivalency between the state of Israel and Hamas, and that the attacks on the Jews in the street.
But you saw that because you saw it. It was a week and a half late. There was attacks in California. There was attacks in the streets of New York at a bagel shop. Yeah. Did they say it because things were getting out of control, or did they say it because they mean it? And I think coming out of the gate first is it's important, and it's important. Look, I think that this is the difference between the right side of history and the wrong side of history, and I always want to be on the right side.
I don't blame you. So, on a bit of a lighter note, I want to ask you a question just in general. So I'm a big movie fan. I like movies a lot. I wanted to go into film as a career initially. Then I realized psychology is a little more stable. But although I will say Canada's propensity for film production is growing at a very rapid rate. A lot of places are coming to film in Toronto and Vancouver, and even Hamilton. Sorry, not even no slam on Hamilton. Sorry for my Hamiltonians. Actually, it's really funny. My friends always had this joke through high school that Hamilton's like the Gotham City of Canada, like the rainy, gross, smoggy. But if you actually go there, it's really beautiful.
It's kind of nice, and you can afford a house there. So.
Yeah.
So there's more and more people going there.
I mean, you can probably afford a house in Gotham too. I mean, I doubt anyone actually wants to live there, so real estate must be really cheap.
Maybe.
Regardless, I was going to ask you: are there any films that you particularly like, or maybe a favorite film?
My knowledge of pop culture is like astonishingly low. And I've gotten into sort of the pandemic watching as an excuse to disconnect from the reality that's that is the never-ending lockdown. But
right.
I've watched things like The Queen's Gambit on Netflix. I've watched hours and hours of TV that I feel like have made my brain mush, like The Tiger King, and I feel for the first time I'm able to engage in a conversation of like what normal people watch on TV. I'm a big sports fan and a news junkie, so I call it like I really like things that are on TV that are live. So I'm a huge baseball fan, and I watch every hour of every day there's news on in every room in my house. So that's kind of how I live, which is a strange way to live, but I've made it a point to get more of that pop culture in when I have the time during this pandemic. I don't know what my favorite movie is.
Absolutely.
It's kind of embarrassing, but it's called Cool Runnings.
I've seen Cool Runnings.
Yeah, so depending on how old you are, but I think it's just like an amazing story, and it makes me laugh every time. And it's the story of the Jamaican bobsled team that went to the Olympics in Calgary.
Movie.
It is a very Canadian movie, and it's a movie that anytime that it's on any of these these channels that you wonder why you're paying for, I always sit and watch it, no matter where I'm going or how late I am for something.
Yeah, hear that, Rogers? Run Cool Runnings more. No, that's a great film.
What's your favorite film?
My favorite film of all time is a film not a lot of people know about. It's a film called Children of Men, and it's a post-apocalyptic movie set in so it was filmed in 2006. It's set in 2024. As in the film came out in 2006. It's set in 2024 in London, where every single country around the world has completely collapsed into chaos, and England is the only country that still exists. You can tell which country produced the film. And there hasn't been a baby born in 18 years. The entire population's been sterile for 18 years. So the youngest person in the population is 18 and a half years old, right? And then miraculously a baby is born. And a lot of things happen. That's all I'm going to say.
All right. Well, I hope the world doesn't descend into chaos, and I can come back for another podcast, and I will watch that movie and we'll talk about it.
Great, awesome. Yeah, I hope we don't end up in England either. As much as I love good old Britain, like I said, we want to empower here, right?
Exactly.
Now, see what you've done to me now.
Now we're getting you to think twice about
my American patriotism,
picking up your tent and moving to Florida.
My Lego tents, yeah. No, but I don't know. Film has definitely been a big part of my life for a very long time, so I always like to ask those sort of questions. And I think what we gravitate towards pop culture really does represent us in some sense. I think the fact that I like Children of Men so much, because ultimately Children of Men is a very, very, very pro-life movie. It's a very, very pro, having children, the importance of children, what society is like without having the innocence of a child. It's the same with... everyone has seen the set of this podcast before. This entire basement is decorated with pop culture icons in every facet and every corner, because a lot of these, superheroes or characters, I do think represent me in some sense in their inherent nature to fulfill good, right?
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's sitting around and looking at this. Look, I'm just totally amazed. And it's like you like Lego as much as I like baseball. So there is there's this deep respect
right.
for somebody that is so committed to a craft. And this is a museum that anybody would be lucky to see.
So you definitely understand the hobbyist aspect. So going more from, so this is a topic I addressed in the first episode of my podcast about role models. So something that I actually wanted to get your opinion on, because you're someone who's working in public life, right? And you're working in politics, so you're working with a lot of people and a lot of different perspectives and places. And so something that I talked about with my first guest that I wanted to revisit is this concept of role modeling. So I'm actually someone who has a lot of trouble role modeling off of people, because I find, and I promise I'm not a nihilist, but I find that preface it with that, right? But I find in some sense, at any point, at any time, any human being can disappoint you. Any person is a person. Everyone is flawed in some way, which is fine. You can't expect people to be perfect. Obviously not. But this idolizing and role modeling people to put them on this pedestal of they are above you and you should strive to be like them, something I've always had trouble with. It's actually why I gravitate towards fiction so much, because idolizing Batman's a lot easier than idolizing. Batman's never going to disappoint you. You know, you always know Batman is gonna beat the bad guy, put him in prison, whatever it might be. Same with Luke Skywalker or Iron Man, whatever it might be. Right? I role model off of fiction a lot easier than I do real people, because I find it a lot easier to model off of these like altruistic caricatures. What's your opinion on that? What's your experience with that?
I don't think you're wrong in the sense that you set yourself up for disappointment. I certainly don't have role models as politicians in my life, and inevitably I think that some decisions are hard and you're not always going to agree, and you've got to hope that the person has the majority of people's best interest. But on the role model issue, like I look at it more as I have mentors in my life,
right.
And I take I've got 3 mentors that have been my mentors for almost a decade, and I know the strengths and weaknesses of each of them. And I hope that if I could take like a good piece and learn a good piece from everybody, and you see this from your teachers in your life, there's some things that you really gravitate towards. There's some things that you identify as, hey, I don't really want to be that.
Right.
And it's almost you get to create this fictional character of, here is the best of everything, and I'm going to try to model my life on that. And I think for mine, it's my family and my parents and what they were able to do under the worst circumstances, and consistently persevere and consistently do things in a way that would ensure that we had the best chance to do whatever we want. There is nothing that's ever going to convince me that is not what I want to do for my kids. So in terms of a role model, I think it's I'm lucky to have been raised by a strong woman who worked hard, and a husband who supported that. And I'm so lucky to have that as my primary role models, and I'm so lucky to be able to pick and choose other pieces from other people. Even though that might be cheating, there isn't one person that I think that I want to be like. I want to be the best of lots of people in my life.
I actually think you hit the nail on the head, because I for the record, I don't completely ignore human beings. I do take aspects of people and apply them to myself, in a sense of like I can name at least 10 different people, mostly teachers and professors, that I see this aspect of. I'm like, great, I want to replicate that in myself. But replicating an entire other person is not something I ever want to do.
I bet you, I'm going to interrupt you. I bet you there's people listening, and there's people listening to this cast right now who think what you're doing right now is something that they want to replicate. That the fact that you're having these conversations, these open conversations where people aren't afraid and people aren't using talking points. They're like, I want to do what Yosef's doing. And so never underestimate the power that you have to be somebody else's, tiny role model too.
Hey, I'm a capitalist. More competition. Let's 100%. Everyone wants to start a podcast. I'm definitely someone who likes to take different aspects from people. But I think there are others who tend to idolize people and fully try to become them, especially in the celebratory sense, which I will never understand. Because someone like Jake Gyllenhaal is my favorite actor of all time. I like Jake Gyllenhaal a lot. He's in plenty of good movies.
For sure.
I know nothing about Jake Gyllenhaal. No matter how many movies or maybe some interviews or funny clips that come up here and there, I know nothing about Jake Gyllenhaal, because he's a person who lives completely separate from my life in Hollywood, in a completely other dimension.
Right.
But there are people among us that believe that they do know fully what's going on in someone else's life and that they should replicate that. And I think that can get really toxic. And I think my issue is the fine line between those two things is I would say the lie that you can fully know a person you don't really know, and the other lie that you can become that person you don't really know.
For
right?
Sure. Well, you have the unique ability to understand, the thing that you like about Jake Gyllenhaal in this case is you like his characters.
Yeah,
you like the scripts that he reads. You like the movies that he's cast in, and you like the writing around him.
Right. I'm sure he's a perfectly nice person.
Maybe he's a nice guy.
Slam him.
Maybe he's not.
Yeah,
but
don't make me think like
that. But you have no idea, and I think that part of that is bred by going back to our conversation of social media, and you get to see what these people want you to see in terms of their lives.
Their activism.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. I'm on social media. My Instagram. I'm a lot nicer in real life than I am on Twitter, and my life looks a lot more put together than it does on than what I actually portray on Instagram. Like if you just turn the camera around, you see the laundry and the messy room and the undone dishes. You don't see that on Instagram. So there's not a whole lot of reality, and you gotta remember. I like this idea of like, what if we just asked everybody to change the background and turn the camera around in your room and see what's going on. Is the dog barking? Are the kids crying? Or
that's a good push.
That's
actually.
a really that's really what I see, and I think we've seen that during this time where we spent an incredible amount of time indoors and seen other people's homes for what they really are.
I actually never thought of it that way. I absolutely know that disconnecting the human element from social media and pushing a certain image is something that most people do. I'm very anti that. I'm posting Instagram stories all the time of the new action figures I buy, or the Lego sets, or this podcast, right? Like I'm very unapologetically myself. But even I will hide certain things. I'm not going to my room where the laundry isn't fully done, or the kitchen where things are and that's fine. We don't have to always you don't have
to share everything.
Right. Yeah. We don't have to always what's the word? Exemplify our flaws in every sense. But yeah, I think that's something that people can toxically fall into is full replication of someone you don't really know. I don't know. It's something I see a lot with young people. Anyway, I've worked in summer camps most of my life. I was never actually a counselor. I was a counselor training for a couple of years, but for the past 4 years, I worked in a camp called Camp Lubavitch, which I'm sure you've heard of. Peter Kent actually visited quite a few times, so he would know me as the photographer of Camp Lubavitch. That's who I was for the past 4 years. Fantastic, amazing job. Best thing in the world. And you see a lot of kids. I mean, we're with kids age 6 to 12, right? And the CIT is a little older than that, who are constantly trying to replicate and be like these people they perceive as almost gods in a certain way, or just like, oh, this person from this movie is the coolest person ever, and I want to be just like him. And it's cool to have goals and aspirations, and maybe you want to take an element of some person, but saying that you want to be that person feels a little disconnected, right?
Yeah, look, I think there's a teachable moment there, because it seems like every celebrity has had their fair share of disappointing us in terms of who they really are. And look, I do think we need role models out there, and the measurement of perfection is one that it's hard to attain. It's hard to attain it in the social media. Like it used to be that you didn't have Facebook or Instagram, and then when you went into a job interview, you actually just got to sit down and talk to someone, and they didn't do their research on you beforehand, and they didn't look at all of those pictures that maybe you didn't want them to see when you were 18 years old and thinking less than you are now. It's the world's changed
anonymity
forever.
Is gone.
Yeah. And you've got to be mindful of that.
We've set up such a minefield of how to actually function as a person. Here's the thing, every generation always says that they're the worst generation, often complains about the previous generation. They didn't struggle, but I believe all suffering is relative, personally. like everyone has their own struggles. Even billionaires, who you think have it all, are some of the saddest people on the planet. All suffering, all struggle is relative and understandable. But we are setting up this sort of dangerous minefield for kids, for adults, for even for young adults and even older adults of what is it actually like to be a person in 2021? Why do you have to have a dual identity of social media and actual humanity? Why can't those be one and the same? And why are we constantly criticizing one of them more than the other? Well,
because there's not much else to do, but all of that to say is at some point, like it's always a calculation of do the benefits outweigh the negatives? And I think the answer is still yes. We're far more connected. We have far more reach. I think I don't have to go to a library and crack open an encyclopedia and look up something, under a certain letter and know how to spell it. I have all of that information.
You don't need a montage of you going through 50
in my
different
hands.
books,
So
right?
I think, the benefit of what this has given us and how much it's opened our minds and opened our worlds and has connected us. Like, if you think about it, we talk about this from a very privileged place in Canada, but, the opening up of social media and the internet to people who are struggling under communism in Cuba is something that, we never thought was possible. They now know. Yeah, they now know what the outside world has to offer, and they can demand that of their own governments. These are really big changes in the world that affect those who are struggling and those who are marginalized a whole lot more in more positive ways. So until that benefit doesn't outweigh the negative, like, we're in this. Like, we might as well dive in and learn how to live with it, and maybe just take some pause. I spoke to a group last week about spend an hour less on social media and do something that's going to help at least one other person. You'll feel better about yourself, and if that's all that happens, that's fine, and you probably help somebody else in the passing. Like, I've done this. I've given myself the challenge. I'm going to spend 1 hour less, a day snooping through Twitter and looking at comments, and I'm just going to go out and do something decent for someone.
I think that's awesome. You're a lot less affected by the negativity bias than I am. I will admit. You're talking the real communist conversation. People in communist countries can actually have conversations with people in the Western world.
For sure.
I guess that's something that it's not in my purview, so it's hard to always conceive of those things. I always just see the most negative sides of social media. I do think there are positive sides to it. Don't get me wrong. But especially studying psychology, and I don't want to sound pretentious when I say that. I'm not a PhD, right? But just looking into the subject, I am wondering what our brains are going to be like in 20 years or 30 years, because our brains are not used to this much exposure for not just blue light, but actual information. Our brains are in full information overload and have been for the past 2 decades, right?
For sure.
As these things increase, especially among children, right? Who know so many things that they never even need to know as children. Why does your 7-year-old need to have an opinion on Donald Trump? Well, your 7-year-old should have an opinion on what Lego set he wants to buy. You know, and obviously I should have a say in that. But I don't know. I do wonder if it's going to be more positive or negative for us in the future. I can't make that claim. Neither can you. None of us can actually fully make that claim.
I'm sure, and I think that part of it is individual. I think parents should have the ability to parent. The government shouldn't sort of tell you necessarily what to do and what to look at and what to see. I think parents have a big role in how children interact with the world, and I think that it's a very sort of personal decision. I think you're going to see, a lot of people affected by this, but think about, potentially how many wars social media can stop. Like, what if you don't have necessarily, in parts of the world where they didn't have this before, you've got a militia army coming into your village to ravage it, and you were able to be warned by things like social media, things like radio, things like, television. Those are the things that we don't think about, and the power of tools like this, to be able to give people that are, living from my perspective, in backwards land, bringing them into what I think is a better life. So. Okay,
it's definitely a very positive push for it. Yeah. All right.
I'm a glass half full person today. You caught me on a good day.
I really try to be. I really do. When you put me in actual situations in life, I always like to use examples on my school would go on Shabbatons, which are getaway weekends, right? And say an activity didn't come through that was supposed to be planned. I'm just happy with my friends. Sure. I'm happy we can joke about, the bus never came, it went this way, that way. That's great. But I really do try to be that person in general of optimism, but sometimes it does get very hard. And like I said, it definitely depends on the day. Actually, like you said, it definitely depends. It definitely depends on the day. It is something I try to strive for more in my life, and I'm glad that today, at least, you're fulfilling.
So
that.
we have you glass half full, and maybe not moving to Florida. Have we gotten there yet?
Wow, this is seriously fundamental change on my character. Okay, so with that being said, before we close out the show, I figured you might want to tell people who are listening who can't actually vote for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Look,
why they should.
I think we've had a good conversation that spanned a whole bunch of topics, but at the end of the day, I am running for elected office in Thornhill. We have had a wonderful member of parliament here for 12 years in Peter Kent, who's supporting my candidacy, and I think that this community deserves the strong voice at the table that I'm going to be. I'm young, I'm unapologetic, and I'm not worried about fitting in with the fancy people in Ottawa. And I will always have the best interests of this community in top of mind, whether it's whether it's the community that I come from or all of the other ones that make up this riding. We've got a really, really tough road ahead when it comes to our economy,
Bathurst, right?
our
Always
spending. Yeah, it's all of those, all of those issues, and I think that the way that we've been going over the last 5 years with the government in Ottawa is not serving the best interests of Canadians. I want to be able to say that this is the best country in the world, and I want to be able, to have people repeat that over and over again.
Evidently you don't strike me as the person who needs to go to the galas and talk like this to get to the interest.
No, where do I send a check? I'd rather do anything else but go to a gala. I think.
Well, you can't now anyway. So.
Well, that might be the best thing about this pandemic, that people are actually helping each other in the community, getting to know their neighbors, and really getting their quote unquote hands dirty. I would rather be packing lunches or baskets for those. Who are less fortunate than be at a fancy dinner table. Yeah. If only most politicians shared a view on that. Okay. All right. Well, with that, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show, Melissa. Thanks so much.
This has been amazing. Where can people find you?
You can find me at Melissa Lantsman, MELISSALANTSMAN.ca, or I'm on Facebook, and I'm on Instagram, and it's all under my name. You can sign up if you want to help the campaign. We've got a ton of support and a ton of young people, and if you need to do those hours, there's no better way of getting those volunteer hours than on a campaign.
Nice. Awesome. Okay. And I would like to mention to my viewers that you can find me. You already know where to find me if you're listening to this podcast. The Communal Conversation is available on Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Breaker, a bunch of other stuff. You look it up and you'll find it. We are also on Instagram, so feel free to follow us on Instagram, The Communal Conversation. I'm posting things here and there, and look out for more stuff. If anyone has any questions or topics they would like me to discuss in future episodes, feel free to DM them to me or leave them in the comments below. And I want to thank you so much to our sponsors, EB Direct and Custom by Shara. So thank you so much for coming on the show, Melissa.
Thanks for having me.
And that's the Communal Conversation episode 12. Closing out. I like to do a snap when it closes out. So 3, 2, 1. There we go.